So I have no slides. This is a bit of a daunting responsibility. So number one, I'm speaking on behalf of 325 million people and their research. And number two, I'm sort of setting the stage for conversation about the whole of what we've heard on what, for me, has been a fantastic conversation, along with a very provocative title that I got a big kick out of sort of the, what, do we know what we don't know? So my topic nominally is what's the research landscape in future of transportation in the US? So I think about it in a couple of different ways. So we have a sort of class of research that we can think of as being the in really envisioning the future. So sometimes we say predict the future. That's what my job is, to predict the future. But I think envision the future is really awfully important, and I'll talk a little bit about why that might be. And then there's obviously a lot of work to get from point A to point B. Sometimes we're just doing what the sort of train example, which I loved, was a perfect example of the kind of incremental change. Well, we have a problem here. The problem is people are really we're leveling off in terms of their safety in driving. They're distracted. We can't get them off their phones. This is a problem. Let's just replace them. Okay, now we solve that problem. But the question, of course, is what are we going to, and how do we measure how we're getting there? So we have people working at this level and working here. In terms of content topics, there's a lot of work, obviously, in safety. That's my area, or at least content-wise is my area. One of the things we'd like to do is get rid of all of the weight associated with keeping people's bodies safe in vehicles in crashes. If we can get rid of crashes, we can actually get rid of airbags and crush zones and all kinds of things. So safety is actually having a sort of secret influence on energy use and other elements of vehicles. People could turn around and talk to each other theoretically. So there's a lot of envisioning of that, but we really do have to figure out how long do we need to actually keep protecting people's bodies in cars. Maybe we need to emphasize certain kinds of impact protection. We can roll back on others, but we need to understand, and obviously we need to understand, are automated vehicles safer than human drivers, and if so, by how much? And that's a moving target. Another whole class of research area, and of course all these things are interrelated, is in mobility. And there's been a lot of talk about that. The US has sort of developed into an extremely sort of personal vehicle, car-centric infrastructure outside of large cities. The vision that we can achieve in terms of energy use and mobility really kind of requires that we upend that model. But the question is, especially the US, it's a big country, and there are an awful lot of people who live in small towns kind of spread out. And so many of the solutions that are integrated, automated, and public transportation and trains and kind of first mile, last mile, all those efficiencies are not actually found in a town of 30,000 people or a town of 50,000 people, even, never mind, smaller ones. So what does that model look like throughout the country? What does that look like in the Midwest? People talk a lot and work a lot about mobility in cities, but that isn't everybody. The other interesting thing about mobility is we measure mobility by looking at where people go. And there are actually quite a lot of people, in particular, because of lack of access to cars and other kinds of public transportation. People want to be able to go places, and they can't. So there are trips not taken that are not actually measured when you measure trips taken. And so we need to sort of ensure, and this is part of the, I forget the phrase, but sort of fair and just transportation systems. And we are doing research, and we are concerned about how the kind of future imagined version of automation and public transport and how this all works is going to serve populations that are currently not served by the very car-centric transportation system that we have. Third big content area is energy, obviously. And energy and mobility are really intertwined, especially. And one of my colleagues always talks about, who's particularly concerned and works heavily in this area, he talks all the time about the current estimates of how automation will change energy use for transportation in the US are range from 20% of current to 200% of current. I'm like, wow, okay, we can narrow that down. But his point is that, in fact, this is what you do when you predict the future, but in fact what we need to do is take charge of the future. So we need to envision where we're headed. And so there are, again, this is research that people are doing that at the same time that people are also trying to figure out how do we incrementally get, move individuals to make choices that kind of move towards these, towards kind of energy efficient operation. Plus, what is car share? How many rides can you get people to share, and how much energy can be saved? Where do you put charging stations? That kind of thing. So the last area that I want to mention, in particular, partly because if you talk to me, I will always mention it, is data. So if you want to know what you don't know, and if you want to know the answers to the things that you don't know, there's several levels there, you need information. And so data and big data in and of itself is actually also a huge area of research. And one of the things I want to kind of leave you with is big data is, by its nature, data that is actually easy to get at. So it's sensors, it's large numbers, it's Twitter, it's large numbers of people. It's very, and what happens with big data is the big data reflects, first of all, what is going on now, and data will generally do that. And secondly, it reflects the population of people who provide us with data. So an awful lot of data comes from, I have a smartphone here somewhere. So if I'm traveling and my smartphone is talking to cell towers, I will participate in the data gathering that travel planners use to decide how to manage their travel planning. But if I am a person who doesn't have a smartphone, then I will not participate in that. And so we have to think about not only how are we measuring, what is the measurement that tells us when we're achieving our goal? What are the metrics? What is the information that we need? And then importantly, what information might we gather almost in a kind of blanket way to answer the question, are there things that we didn't know? And then I guess the last thing I would leave you with is another question, which is, do we know who we don't know? That's what I have to say. We can